My sister convinced our dying mother to sign her entire $435,000 estate into a secret trust just for her, and then told me I was cut off for being greedy. So I forced her to publicly confess and wire me every cent before I donate bone marrow to save her daughter. And I have zero regrets. Before we get into this, drop where you're listening from and your local time in the comments. I read everyone. I'm a 31-year-old woman. My name is Emma, and I live in Austin, Texas. My sister Melissa is 2 years older than me. Growing up in a suburb outside Houston, our family dynamic was never a secret. Melissa was the golden child. She was the pretty one, the popular one, the one with the perfect blonde hair and the easy laugh that made strangers smile at the grocery store. She got new clothes for school, while I wore her hand-me-downs until the cuffs were frayed and the colors faded. My mom, Diane, would say things like Melissa has such a bright future, or Emma is just so difficult. I heard difficult so many times it became a fact, like my eye color. I was a quiet kid, a little awkward, more comfortable with library books than cheerleading tryouts, and in my mom's eyes that made me a problem. By the time I was 10, I had accepted that no matter what I did, Melissa would always come first. And for a long time, I didn't fight it. I just worked hard, got good grades, and tried to make my own way. I told myself that if I could just be successful enough, maybe one day my mom would look at me the same way she looked at Melissa. My dad left when I was 7. He was a salesman, gone half the time anyway, and the only thing I remember about his departure was the silence. No big fight, no slamming doors. One day his side of the closet was empty. After that, it was just the 3 of us in that little house in Katy. Mom worked nights as a nurse at Memorial Hermann, 12-hour shifts in the pediatric oncology ward, watching other people's children die. She saved every penny, not from a sense of abundance, but from a bone-deep fear of losing everything. She bought that house in 1994 for $89,000. Back then, it was a plain 3-bedroom with a carport and a creaky back deck that Mom painted herself every other spring. The paint was always the same soft yellow, the color of pale butter, and it would peel in the humidity by July, little curls of latex that I'd pick at while sitting on the steps, waiting for her to come home from a shift. Inside, the house smelled like lemon pledge and the faint, permanent scent of hospital antiseptic that clung to her scrubs. The carpet was beige and matted, with a permanent traffic pattern from the hallway to the kitchen. By the time I was in my mid-20s, that house was worth around $340,000. Mom had also managed to save almost $95,000 in a high-yield savings account over decades of double shifts and skipped vacations. She never bought anything extravagant. Her one indulgence was fresh flowers on the kitchen table every Sunday, a habit she kept even when cancer was eating her alive. Yellow roses, mostly, the Texas state flower, and she'd arranged them in a blue glass vase that had been her mother's. I remember watching her trim the stems with kitchen scissors, her fingers steady even after 16 hours on her feet, and I thought she was the strongest person alive. She told both of us many times over the years that we would split everything equally when she was gone. Those words were a liturgy in our house. "You girls will be fine," she'd say. "Half each, no fighting." I believed her. I never thought about contesting that promise, never dreamed it could be any other way. The money didn't feel real to me anyway. It was just an abstraction, something that would happen in a distant future I didn't want to imagine, because imagining it meant imagining a world without my mom. Despite everything, I loved her. I still love her, even now. That's the hardest part to explain to people who only see the betrayal. She was my mom, and she was dying, and I was not ready. When I was 27, Melissa was 29. I had moved to Austin a few years earlier for a job as a junior graphic designer at a small marketing agency. The salary was $38,000. I had $22,000 in student loans from a state university degree. I'd scraped together with Pell Grants and part-time jobs. I rented a 1-bedroom apartment in a complex off Riverside Drive for $950 a month, which felt like a fortune. The complex had a pool that was always a little cloudy and a laundry room where the machines ate quarters. My apartment was on the 2nd floor, and the stairs were concrete and uneven, so you had to watch your step. The living room window faced a parking lot that flooded every time it rained. The walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbors' phone conversations, word for word, about her on-again, off-again boyfriend named Derek. I had a futon from Walmart, a coffee table I'd found on the curb, and a single framed print of a Texas sunset that I'd bought at a thrift store for $3. My car was a 2012 Hyundai Elantra with a cracked windshield and an engine that whined above 50 miles an hour like it was in pain. The air conditioning worked only intermittently, which in a Texas summer is a special kind of misery. I'd drive with the windows down and my left arm stuck out, and by the time I got to work my shirt would be soaked through. Melissa, on the other hand, was living in a rented room in Houston, working part-time at a yoga studio, and leaning on Mom to cover her car insurance, her phone bill, and sometimes her groceries. I didn't judge her for it back then. I made excuses for her the way I always had. She was finding herself. She had a free spirit. She was dealing with anxiety. The truth was simpler. Melissa had never been expected to work for anything, so she never did. The golden child doesn't need to earn love, it just pours over her like sunlight, and that sunlight was about to become a weapon. In early March of that year, Mom got the diagnosis, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. They gave her 8 months, and in my memory, those 8 months are stretched and compressed at the same time, like a nightmare where you run but don't move. I was at my desk when Melissa called. I remember the exact shade of gray on the cubicle wall in front of me, a dingy fabric wall the color of old oatmeal. I remember a half-eaten bagel on my desk, the cream cheese going warm. I remember the hum of the office printer. Melissa was crying so hard I could barely understand the words. "It's Mom. It's cancer. It's bad, Emma. It's really bad." I put my hand over my mouth and didn't move for maybe 5 minutes after she hung up. Then I walked to my boss's office and asked for FMLA leave. They told me I could take intermittent leave, so I drove down to Houston every single weekend for the next 7 months. I burned through almost all my savings on gas, on tolls, on the little things Mom needed that insurance wouldn't cover. A wedge pillow, a special lotion for her dry skin, a tablet so she could watch her gardening shows. I'd leave Austin at 5 a.m. on Saturday morning, the sky still dark, the highway empty except for semi-trucks and the occasional early commuter. I'd stop at a Buc-ee's halfway for a coffee and a kalash, and I'd sit in the parking lot for 10 minutes just staring at the windshield, steeling myself for whatever version of Mom I'd find that weekend. Sometimes she'd be lucid and talkative, telling me stories about her own childhood in Galveston. Other times she'd be so exhausted she couldn't lift her head from the pillow. Meanwhile, Melissa moved back into the house immediately, citing her need to be a full-time caregiver. I believed that too. I thought she was being noble. Later, I would realize she was building a fortress. From the very first weekend, things felt off. The air in that house had changed. It wasn't just sickness, the hollow weight of pending death. It was something in the way Melissa looked at me when I arrived, like I was an intruder. She had always been territorial about Mom's attention, but this was different. She started answering every question I asked Mom before Mom could speak. "How are you feeling today, Mama?" "She's tired, Emma. Don't make her talk." "Can I get you anything?" "I already got her water. She doesn't need anything." It was a constant, low-grade friction that wore me down. When I tried to help with Mom's meds, Melissa would push my hand away, saying I didn't know the schedule. When I cooked, she said Mom couldn't stomach my cooking, only hers. When I sat with Mom to watch TV, Melissa would hover in the doorway, watching us with flat eyes. I'd bring Mom her favorite peach yogurt from the grocery store, and Melissa would put it in the back of the fridge and say it had too much sugar. I'd bring a photo album from when we were kids, and Melissa would take it from my hands and say Mom was too tired for memories. It was death by 1,000 small cuts, each one barely noticeable on its own, but exhausting in accumulation. One weekend, about 3 months in, I noticed Mom was different toward me too. She had always been a little sharp, but now she was cold. She wouldn't meet my eyes. When I held her hand, she pulled it away after a few seconds. I thought it was the cancer, the pain, the fear. But then one Saturday afternoon when Melissa had run to the pharmacy, I sat on the edge of Mom's bed and asked if I had done something to upset her. The bedroom was dim, the curtains drawn, and the air smelled like menthol and medicine. Mom's face was thinner now, her cheekbones prominent, her skin grayish. She turned her face to the window and said, "Melissa tells me you've been asking about the will." The word will hit me like a slap. I said, "Mama, I have never once asked about the will. Not once. I don't care about the money, I just want you to be okay." Mom closed her eyes and said, so softly I almost missed it, "I've made my decisions." Her voice had a finality that chilled me, I tried to press, but she just shook her head and pretended to sleep. When Melissa got back, she somehow knew I'd brought it up. She cornered me in the kitchen. Mom is dying. You need to stop obsessing over money. Her arms were crossed, her jaw tight. I told her I wasn't, that something was being twisted, but she just rolled her eyes. You've always been jealous. You can't stand that Mom trusts me to handle things. That was the moment I stopped seeing Melissa as my flawed but lovable sister and started seeing her as something else entirely. I just didn't have the right name for it yet. Looking back, there were signs I ignored that something was very wrong. Mom started calling her attorney, a man named Mr. Ackerman, more frequently. She would shoo me out of the room when she took those calls. Melissa started spending a lot of time with a notary public who was also her friend from yoga, a woman named Chrissy who I'd met once or twice and who always looked at me like I smelled bad. New documents appeared on the kitchen counter, and when I glanced at them, Melissa would sweep them away like I was a child trying to grab a hot pan. Mom's checkbook, which she'd always kept in her nightstand, migrated to a locked drawer in the living room desk. I found the key once, by accident, in a junk drawer among old rubber bands and dead batteries, but the drawer itself was locked tight. When I asked Mom about finances, just normal questions like whether she needed help with bills, Melissa would materialize and say, "I've got it handled, Emma. We don't need to burden you." I let it all slide. I was exhausted from working and driving and watching my mother shrink into a ghost. I didn't have the energy to fight a battle I didn't even know I was in. The last month was the worst. Mom was on a morphine pump, drifting in and out. I would sit with her and hold her hand, and sometimes she would squeeze it, and I would cry because I knew that squeeze would soon be gone. Her hands were so thin now, the skin papery, the veins blue and visible. I'd trace her knuckles with my thumb and try to memorize the feel of them. Melissa managed the household like a general. She hired a hospice nurse but stayed in the room for every visit. She controlled the visitor list, and suddenly my Aunt Carolyn, my mom's sister, stopped coming around. Later I found out Melissa had told her I was causing drama. The isolation was complete. By the time Mom took her last breath on a Thursday morning in early December, I was holding her left hand and Melissa was on the right side, sobbing loudly, a performance so raw and perfect it could have won awards. I cried too, but quietly, because my grief was a private thing and also because I was scared. I was scared of what came next, and I didn't even know why. The funeral was small. Melissa handled all the arrangements using some of Mom's savings. She picked an expensive casket, a mahogany one with brass handles and a cream satin interior that probably cost as much as my car. A huge spray of white roses, the kind of arrangement you see in magazines, flanked the altar. The reception was catered at the house, little sandwiches and a fruit platter and a coffee urn on the kitchen counter. She made the decisions, and I helped carry the casket. I wore a black dress from a consignment store because I didn't have anything else appropriate, and the zipper caught every time I tried to pull it up. I gave a eulogy I barely remember writing, something about Mom's strength and her garden and the way she hummed while she folded laundry. I wrote it on a yellow legal pad at 2 a.m. The night before, my handwriting shaky, my eyes so full of tears I couldn't see the lines. Melissa's eulogy was longer and smoother, delivered with the confidence of someone who had practiced, full of anecdotes I'd never heard, all of which painted her as the devoted daughter and me as a vague background figure. At the reception, people I'd known my whole life looked at me with a kind of puzzled distance, like they weren't sure who I was. Melissa flitted among them, accepting hugs, nodding gravely. I heard someone whisper, "It's so good Melissa was here to take care of her. Emma was never around." I had driven 300 miles round trip every weekend for 7 months. I had held the vomit bucket. I had sat in the dark at 3 a.m. while Mom screamed from the pain, but none of them knew that. Melissa had written the narrative, and I was just a stranger in my own family. After the burial, Melissa told me the reading of the will would happen at Mr. Ackerman's office the following week. I asked if I could see a copy beforehand, just a draft, just to know what to expect. She said no, that the lawyer needed to explain everything properly. The night before the meeting, I barely slept. I lay in my childhood bed, which still had the faded pink comforter I'd picked out when I was 12, and I stared at the ceiling and tried to imagine what was coming. The ceiling had those little glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck up there when I was 8, a few of them still faintly green in the dark. I still believed, in some naive corner of my heart, that Mom had kept her promise. Half each. Equal, Mr. Ackerman's office was in a strip mall off I-10, next to a check cashing place and a laundromat. I wore the same black dress from the funeral, the one with the tricky zipper. It was a little too tight in the shoulders. Melissa arrived in a brand new navy pantsuit, her hair twisted into a sleek bun, her heels clicking on the linoleum. She didn't look at me. We sat across a cheap conference table from Mr. Ackerman, a silver-haired man with a kind face that I would later come to distrust. The table was fake wood, the kind with a peeling laminate edge, and there was a water stain in the shape of Florida near the corner. He opened a folder and began reading. I didn't understand most of the legal jargon, but I understood the Melissa Diane Trust and the entirety of the estate. I understood residuary beneficiary. I understood that my name was not mentioned anywhere in the document, not once, not in the trust, not in the pour-over will, not in a personal property memorandum. I received nothing, not a single dollar, not my grandmother's ring, not even a framed photo. Silence. I looked at Melissa. She was staring straight ahead at the wall, her lips pressed together in a way that looked almost reverent. I said, "What is this?" My voice came out as a whisper. Mr. Ackerman explained that 5 months prior, Mom had executed a new estate plan. A revocable living trust had been created, naming Melissa as the sole trustee and sole beneficiary. The house had been transferred into it via a warranty deed. The bank accounts had been assigned to it. The car, the savings bonds, even Mom's IRA had been red-idled. Everything was now controlled by Melissa. I asked for a copy of the documents and he handed me a thick stack. I saw my mom's signature, shaky but unmistakable, on the signature page of the trust agreement. The date was July of that year, the same month Melissa had told Mom I was obsessing over money. The notary was Chrissy. The two witnesses were Chrissy and a man named Ron, who I later learned was Chrissy's boyfriend. In the parking lot, I finally found my voice. "Melissa, look at me." She turned and I saw the mask slip. There was no grief on her face. There was a tiny smirk, the kind you can only recognize on a sibling you've known your whole life. "You did this," I said. "You manipulated her. You poisoned her against me, and then you sat there while she signed her whole life over to you." Melissa's smirk widened into something uglier. "You have some nerve," she said. Her voice was steady, rehearsed. "You spent years barely visiting. As soon as she got sick, you started circling like a vulture, asking about the will, demanding to see bank statements. Mom saw right through you. She told me she didn't want you to get a cent. She knew you'd waste it on your dead-end life. You were always greedy, Emma." "This is just karma." I was crying now, shaking. "That's not true and you know it. I came every weekend. I helped with her meds. I held her while she vomited. You're lying and you know you're lying, and one day everyone will know it too." Melissa unlocked her car, a newish Honda CR-V that Mom had co-signed for a year earlier, not knowing it would eventually become Melissa's trophy. "Believe what you want," she said. "The legal documents are clear. You got what you deserved. You're nothing." She drove away. I stood in that parking lot for a long time. The asphalt was cracked, weeds pushing through. Cars honked on the interstate. I remember thinking that the world should have stopped, that this kind of betrayal should have triggered some cosmic pause, but everything just kept moving. Eventually, I got in my battered old Hyundai and drove back to Austin. I don't remember the drive. I remember pulling into my apartment complex, climbing the stairs, unlocking my door, and then screaming into a pillow on my living room floor until my throat was raw. I had never felt pain like that. It was physical. It was a hole in my chest that I thought might swallow me. I had nowhere to turn. I called my Aunt Carolyn, who cried with me and said she had suspected something but Melissa had blocked her. I called a cousin on my dad's side who listened for 5 minutes then made an excuse to hang up. I called Melissa twice. Both times went to voicemail. The second time I left a message, sobbing, asking how she could do this. She never called back. That night I opened my laptop and saw that she had blocked me on Facebook and Instagram already. I slammed the laptop shut and didn't sleep. The next 2 weeks were a blur of physical and mental collapse. I couldn't keep food down. I lost 7 pounds. My boss told me I looked like death and suggested I take more time off, unpaid, which I couldn't afford to do but did anyway because I couldn't function. Without pay, my checking account started bleeding. The dollar one, $200 I'd spent on funeral expenses, and gas had already bounced a couple of small bills. I had been counting on an inheritance to pay off the $4,000 in credit card debt I'd accumulated during Mom's illness, and maybe to afford a security deposit for a better apartment. Now I had nothing. I went back to work after 2 weeks because I had no choice, but my performance was terrible and I knew it. I'd sit at my desk and stare at the screen, the pixels blurring, unable to summon a single creative thought. My boss, a well-meaning woman named Tracy, called me into her office and asked if I was okay. I said yes, I was fine, just tired. She didn't believe me, I could tell, but she didn't push. I went back to my desk and pretended to work. Then Melissa started posting. A friend who still followed her sent me screenshots because she thought I should know. The first text came on a Tuesday morning, a notification with no message, just a photo. Melissa posted a photo of the house with a fresh coat of paint, a soft sage green. The caption read, "Giving mom's home the love it deserves. She'd be so proud." The comments were full of people praising her. In the background of another photo, I saw new hardwood floors, stainless steel appliances, a smart fridge. She'd used estate money to renovate the entire kitchen. A week later, she posted from Cancun, a selfie on a white sand beach with a mimosa in her hand, the turquoise water behind her. Her sunglasses were designer, her swimsuit brand new, her smile wide and perfect. I stared at that photo until my eyes burned. I blocked her on everything. I blocked her number, her backup Instagram, even her Venmo. But the damage was done. That image of her smiling face followed me into my dreams. I tried to fight it legally. I sold my television for $120 to a guy on Craigslist who came to my apartment and haggled me down from $150. I sold my grandmother's sewing machine, the only thing of hers I'd been given before she died, for $200 to a vintage shop on South Congress. The woman behind the counter examined it with a practiced eye, ran her finger over the gold decal, and asked if I was sure. I said yes, and she handed me $10, $20 bills, and I walked out feeling like I'd sold a piece of my own skeleton. I used that money to pay for a consultation with a trust disputes attorney here in Austin. His name was Mark Ellison, a nice man in his 50s with a diploma from Baylor on the wall and a weary look in his eyes. His office was in a glass tower downtown, the kind of building where the elevator plays soft jazz, and I felt completely out of place in my scuffed flats and thrift store blazer. He reviewed the trust documents, the deed, the notary certificate, the witness affidavits. He took his time, flipping pages, making small notes on a legal pad. Then he set his pen down and folded his hands. He told me it was almost impossible to challenge. My mom had been declared of sound mind by her oncologist 3 weeks before signing, in a letter that Melissa had apparently procured. The trust was properly executed. The witnesses, though clearly biased, had given sworn statements that Mom was not under duress. The attorney shrugged a sad, professional shrug. Unless you have evidence of outright fraud, like a forged signature or a video of your sister threatening her, you are looking at an extraordinarily expensive battle you will probably lose. Your sister can afford to drag this out. Estate litigation can cost 6 figures. Can you afford 6 figures? I left his office and sat in my car for an hour, the cracked windshield throwing spiderweb shadows across my lap. Rock bottom didn't come all at once. It came in layers, like sediment, each one burying me deeper. My rent was $950, already a stretch on my salary. By February, after skipping a paycheck during my unpaid leave, I had to choose between the power bill and my student loan payment. I chose the loan because defaulting scared me more than darkness. The lights got cut off on a Thursday. I remember the exact date, February 18th. I came home from work to a silent, dark apartment. The refrigerator had been off for hours, the food inside starting to warm. I didn't have money to replace it, so I ate cold soup from a can by the light of my phone. The soup was tomato, the condented from the back of the pantry, and I ate it straight from the can with a plastic spoon. I sat on my mattress on the floor because I'd already sold the bed frame, and I remember thinking, this is what invisible looks like. The power was off for 3 days. I showered at a truck stop off I-35, the kind of place where the water pressure is low and the soap is pink and smells like industrial detergent. I'd go in the early morning before the truckers and stand under the lukewarm spray, willing myself not to cry. On the 3rd day, the truck stop manager kicked me out, said I wasn't a customer, said the shower was for paying guests only. I walked back to my dark apartment in the February drizzle, my shoes soaking through, my coat too thin. Then my car started stalling at red lights. The engine would shudder and die, and I'd have to restart it while people honked behind me. The mechanic said it needed a new alternator, $800 for the part and labor. I didn't have $80, let alone $800. I started taking the bus to work. The bus stop was a mile from my apartment, and I walked it in the February drizzle, my shoes soaking through, my coat too thin. I had an umbrella, but it was one of those cheap collapsible ones that flips inside out in a stiff wind, and I spent more time wrestling with it than actually using it. I sold my furniture piece by piece. First, the coffee table went for $1.30 to a college kid who lived 2 buildings over. Then the bookshelf for $1.20. Then the small dining table for $1.40. I kept my mattress. I ate from a single bowl, a single spoon. My coworkers started to notice I was losing weight and looking haggard, but I lied and said I was just stressed. I'd catch them glancing at me in the break room, their eyes lingering on my too loose clothes, my unwashed hair, but nobody said anything. I was grateful for that and also deeply ashamed. In early April, I got laid off. The agency lost their biggest client, a local restaurant chain that had contracted for a massive rebrand, and as the most junior designer, I was the first to go. Tracy called me into her office again, but this time her face was different, tight and apologetic. She said she was sorry, that it wasn't about performance, just numbers, but the words blurred together. She handed me a folder and I walked out with a box of my desk things. A coffee mug, a small succulent that was already dying, a few pens. They gave me 2 weeks severance, which worked out to about $400 after taxes. I filed for unemployment, but the process was a nightmare. The website crashed constantly, the phone lines were jammed, and I never seemed to have the right documentation. I spent hours on hold, listening to the same tinny hold music on repeat, a synthetic orchestral version of a song I didn't recognize. It took 6 weeks to get my first payment, and by then I was already drowning. I sent out over 150 resumes in 3 months. I customized cover letters, I reached out to recruiters, I applied to jobs I was overqualified for, jobs I was underqualified for, jobs I didn't even want. I got 4 interviews. One was for a receptionist position at a dental office that paid $12 an hour, and the interviewer, a woman with a helmet of lacquered hair, asked me if I had any experience with multi-line phone systems. I said I was a quick learner. I didn't get it. Another was for a design role at a startup, and I made it to the final round, a nerve-wracking presentation over Zoom where my internet kept cutting out because I was using the Wi-Fi from the coffee shop downstairs. They went with someone who had a little more experience. I cried in a Starbucks bathroom after that call, the kind of ugly crying where your nose runs and your whole body shakes, and I had to stuff toilet paper against my mouth so no one would hear. I had to move. My lease was up in May, and my landlord had already asked if I was renewing at an increased rate. I found a studio apartment on the east side, in a part of town where police sirens were the lullaby and the roaches were the size of my thumb. The rent was $600 a month, all bills not included, and the building smelled like old cigarettes and mildew. The front door had 3 deadbolts, and the lobby floor was sticky in a way I didn't want to think about. My unit was on the ground floor, and the window looked out onto a concrete wall 4 feet away. The carpet was so stained I never walked on it barefoot, a patchwork of brown and gray, and something that might have been ketchup. The first night I moved in, I lay on my mattress on that disgusting floor and listened to my upstairs neighbor scream into his phone about money he was owed. The walls were so thin I could hear every word. He owed someone $200, and that person was going to break his legs if he didn't pay by Friday. I pulled the covers over my head and willed myself to disappear. I started driving for a food delivery app when my car actually ran, which was sporadic. The alternator finally died completely in the parking lot of a Whataburger, the engine giving one last shudder before going silent. I sat there, smelling the faint grease from the fast food bag I just delivered, staring at the dead dashboard. A tow truck was $150 just to show up. The repair was now $100 because of tow fees, and I simply did not have it. I missed 3 car payments, the phone calls from the lender getting more and more insistent, and one morning I walked outside to find an empty space where my Hyundai used to be. There was a chalk mark on the curb, a phone number I could call to retrieve my things from inside it. I sat down on that curb and stared at the empty pavement. That was the exact moment I can point to and say that's when I broke. No car meant no delivery work. No delivery work meant no income beyond unemployment, which barely covered my rent. I had $23 in my checking account and a maxed-out credit card. I hadn't eaten a hot meal in 3 days. My phone was so cracked I could barely read the screen, a spiderweb of fractures that occasionally cut my thumb. I remember a truck drove by with a trailer, and for a quick, dark second I wished it would just hit me and end it. That thought scared me enough to make me call Jenna. Jenna and I had worked together at the agency. She was a senior designer, 3 years older than me, brilliant and sharp-tongued, and the kind of person who had no patience for self-pity but infinite patience for genuine struggle. She had left the agency a year before the layoffs to go freelance full-time, and I had always admired her guts. She was the kind of person who showed up to work in bright red lipstick and a leather jacket and said exactly what she thought, but she also kept a stash of granola bars in her desk for when I forgot to eat lunch. We'd kept in loose touch, liking each other's posts, occasional texts. That night, I called her from the curb. I didn't plan to dump everything on her, but the moment she answered, I just started talking. I told her about the inheritance, the trust, the lie Melissa had told. I told her about the cold soup in the dark, the repo, the roaches. I told her about that truck and the thought that had crossed my mind. I cried so hard I couldn't breathe, and Jenna just listened. When I finally stopped, she said, "Emma, I'm driving to Austin tomorrow. Pack what you can carry. You're staying with me until you get back on your feet, and I don't want to hear any arguments." I whispered okay and hung up. The next day, Jenna showed up in her gray Honda Civic, her hair in a messy ponytail, her trunk already empty to make room for my garbage bags. She walked into that awful studio, looked at the Roach Motel on the counter, the single spoon, the mattress on the floor, and she just said, "Okay, let's move." We loaded my meager possessions in 10 minutes. On the drive to San Antonio, where she lived, she talked. Not at me, but to me. "I know you feel broken, but you're not. You're broke. That's a temporary condition. You have skills. You have talent. The world knocked you down, but you're still breathing, so you get back up. And you're going to let me help you because that's what friends do, and also because I will not let your sister win. That woman is a snake, and she deserves to see you thriving, whether she ever knows it or not." It was the kind of tough love I needed. I nodded, staring out the window at the flat Texas scrubland, and I felt a tiny, fragile spark of something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Jenna lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in a complex in northwest San Antonio, near the medical center. It was clean, brightly lit, and her spare bedroom had an actual bed with sheets that smelled like lavender. The walls were a calming pale blue, and there was a desk by the window with a small succulent that was actually alive. I cried again when I saw it. Jenna handed me a towel and said, "Take a shower. I'm making pasta. You're going to eat, sleep, and then tomorrow we make a plan." For the first 3 days, I just slept. My body had been running on adrenaline and debt for so long that it collapsed the moment safety presented itself. I'd sleep 12 hours, wake up long enough to eat a bowl of soup or a piece of toast, then drift off again. Jenna brought me food on a tray like I was a patient, and she didn't press. On the 4th day, she called me into her home office, which was a beautiful setup with a giant monitor and a mechanical keyboard, and she said, "All right, time to rebuild." I stayed with Jenna for 6 months. She charged me no rent. She fed me. She even bought me a refurbished laptop for $400 so I could work. It was a silver MacBook, a few years old with a tiny scratch on the lid, and it felt like a treasure. In return, I helped with her admin work, her invoicing, her client emails, and I learned everything I could about UX design. She taught me Figma, wireframing, prototyping, user research, interaction design. I already had a visual design background, so I wasn't starting from zero, but learning the UX process felt like unlocking a new language. Every evening after helping Jenna, I would spend 3 or 4 more hours taking online courses on Coursera and Udemy, doing practice projects, building a portfolio. I redesigned a food bank website for free as a case study, agonizing over every pixel, every user flow. I woke up at 6 a.m. to apply for freelance gigs on Upwork and Fiverr. The first project I landed was a logo refresh for a bakery in Ohio, and they paid me $200. The email from the client said, "We love it, sending payment now." I literally printed the receipt and taped it to the wall above my desk. I still have it. The first few months of freelancing were brutal. I was working 12-hour days between Jenna's tasks and my own clients, and the pay was not consistent. One month I made $600. The next I made $500. It was terrifying, but also exhilarating because it was mine. No one could take it from me. I also took a part-time job at a coffee shop near the apartment to cover my tiny personal expenses. The shop was called Brood Awakening, and I worked the early shift, 5 a.m. to noon, before coming home to freelance. I scooped espresso shots and wiped down tables and dealt with cranky customers, and I didn't mind it because it kept me afloat without depending entirely on Jenna. I started paying her back in small ways. I'd buy groceries, deep clean the bathroom, walk her dog when she was on deadline. The dog was a small, anxious terrier mix named Pixel, and I'd take him on long walks around the complex, letting him sniff every bush while I listened to design podcasts on my headphones. She never asked for a dime, but I needed to feel like I was contributing. After 6 months, I had saved $3,000. That was more money than I'd had in years. I found a tiny one-bedroom apartment in San Antonio for $700 a month. It was in a decent neighborhood, a block from a park, and the walls weren't crumbling. The apartment had a small patio, just big enough for one chair, and I'd sit out there in the evenings and watch the birds. The first night I spent there, I sat on a thrift store couch I'd bought for $1.50, a brown corduroy thing that smelled faintly of someone else's cat, and cried, but this time the tears were relief. I was alone, yes, but I was safe, and I had proven to myself that I could survive. Over the next 3 years, I went from freelancing to landing a full-time remote job as a UX designer at a tech company based in Denver. The application process was a gauntlet: a phone screen, a portfolio review, a design challenge, a panel interview. For the design challenge, I was given 48 hours to redesign a feature for a hypothetical budgeting app, and I barely slept, obsessing over every detail. I was so nervous during the panel that I thought I might pass out, my hands shaking as I walked them through my prototypes, but I got the offer. $72,000 a year plus benefits. I read that email in my little apartment, and I shouted so loud the neighbor knocked on the wall. For the first time in my life, I had health insurance, paid time off, and a 401k with a company match. I didn't feel real. I felt like I was wearing someone else's life. I was disciplined with my money. I'd been burned so badly by poverty that I was almost obsessive. I kept driving a used Civic I'd bought for $4,000 cash, a 2010 with 140,000 miles, and a dent in the rear bumper. I cooked at home, meal prepping beans and rice and vegetables in little glass containers that I'd bought at a dollar store. I used a budgeting app to track every cent, logging even the $2 I spent on a gas station coffee. The first thing I did was pay off the last of my student loans with a small bonus I got after my first year. That was a $300 payment that made me feel like I'd shed a physical weight. Then I built an emergency fund. $1,000, then $5,000, then $10,000. I stopped fearing the sound of the phone ringing because I knew no debt collector was on the other end. I started investing in a Roth IRA, index funds, boring safe things. I watched my credit score climb from 520 to 750 over the course of 2 years, and I celebrated by buying a plant. A monstera. It sits in my living room today, its big green leaves unfurling toward the window like it's reaching for something. I also went to therapy. That was maybe the most important part. My job's health plan covered it, and I started seeing a wonderful therapist named Dr. Ray's twice a month. Her office was in a small brick building near the Pearl Brewery, with a waiting room that always had a jigsaw puzzle on the coffee table. We talked about my mom, the golden child dynamic, the way I had internalized the idea that I was difficult. We talked about Melissa's betrayal and the rage I still carried, a cold ember in my chest that wouldn't go out. Dr. Ray's helped me see that my mother's choices were not a reflection of my worth. They were a reflection of her own brokenness and of Melissa's manipulation. Forgiveness didn't mean letting Melissa back into my life. It meant loosening her grip on my mind. I learned to say, what she did was wrong, and I deserve peace despite it. I would lie on that office couch and cry, and then I would leave feeling a little lighter. It took years, but eventually the anger became a scar instead of an open wound. By the time I turned 31, I had $35,000 in savings, a 750 credit score, and a quiet life I genuinely loved. I still worked remotely in UX, now making $95,000 after a promotion. I rented a sunny one-bedroom apartment in Austin again, in the Hyde Park neighborhood, with a balcony where I could drink my coffee and watch the birds. The apartment had hardwood floors and a clawfoot tub, and I'd hung string lights on the balcony that made the whole place feel like a tiny magical refuge. I adopted a rescue cat named Toast, a fat orange tabby who slept on my keyboard while I worked. I had a small group of close friends who knew my story and loved me anyway. I dated occasionally, though I was careful and guarded. I took solo trips to state parks and small towns, reveling in the freedom of being able to afford a tank of gas without panic. I didn't post about my life on social media much, just an occasional sunset, a photo of toast. I had long since blocked Melissa and her entire circle on every platform, and I didn't think about her except in those therapy sessions where I imagined what I would say to her if I ever had to see her again. I had accepted that I would never see a penny of my inheritance. The price of my peace was worth more than $435,000. I was content. Then, in late September, my phone rang. The caller ID was a Houston area code I didn't recognize. I was at my desk in the middle of a Figma file and I almost sent it to voicemail. But something told me to answer. I pressed accept and said, "Hello." And I heard a voice I hadn't heard in over 5 years. Melissa. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. "Emma, please don't hang up, please, it's Lily, my daughter. She's sick, Emma. She has leukemia. AML, acute myeloid leukemia. She's 9 years old. The doctors say she needs a bone marrow transplant and they've tested everyone in the family. My husband, his parents, my cousins. Nobody matches. Nobody. Emma, you're the only one. You're the only full genetic match. Please, please, you have to get tested. You have to help her. She's just a little girl." Her voice cracked and broke into sobbing, and for a long moment I couldn't speak. Lily, my niece. I hadn't seen her since she was 4 years old. At a tense family reunion I had attended solely to see my mom one last time before she got too sick to travel. Lily had been a shy little girl with messy braids and a gap-toothed smile, and she had clung to my leg and asked me to read her a book about princesses. I had read that book 3 times in a row, sitting on the floor of a rented community center while the adults talked around us, and she had fallen asleep against my shoulder, her little fingers curled around the hem of my shirt. That memory hit me like a wave. I didn't say much to Melissa. I said I needed time to think, and I hung up before she could protest. The next day, a transplant coordinator from Texas Children's Hospital called me directly. Her name was Sonia, and she was very professional, very kind, and she explained the situation in clinical terms. Lily had been diagnosed with AML 7 months ago. She'd gone through several rounds of chemotherapy, each one brutal, each one leaving her weaker. She'd lost her hair, her appetite, her ability to attend school. The disease was stubborn and had relapsed. A bone marrow transplant from a matched sibling donor was her best shot at survival. Without it, the odds were grim. They had run the family HLA typing, using DNA samples from Lily's father, her paternal grandparents, and whoever else in the extended family had volunteered. By some twist of genetics, I was a perfect 10 out of 10 match. The only one. Sonia asked if I would be willing to undergo confirmatory blood testing. I told her I needed a few days. I spent that week in a fog that rivaled the days after Mom died. I sat on my balcony with toast in my lap and watched the Austin skyline turn gold in the sunset. I thought about Lily's little hands holding that princess book. I thought about the cold soup in the dark. I thought about the repossession, the roaches, the $200 check on my wall. I thought about my mom's shaky signature on a document she didn't fully understand. And I thought about Melissa's smirk in a strip mall parking lot. The rage I thought I'd buried came roaring back, but it wasn't just rage anymore. It was clarity. I was in a position of power for the first time in my life. I held something Melissa needed more than she had ever needed anything. And I decided that I would help, but I would not be a victim again. I called Melissa back and kept my voice calm, almost cold. "I'll meet you, in person, alone, at a place I choose." She agreed instantly, practically sobbing with gratitude, promising she'd do anything. I chose a quiet coffee shop in San Marcos, a halfway point between Austin and Houston. It was called the Cozy Cup, a small place with mismatched furniture and a wall of local art for sale. I arrived an hour early and sat in a corner booth with my back to the wall, nursing a black coffee that had gone cold. When Melissa walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked a decade older than 33. Her hair was lank, pulled back in a greasy ponytail. She had dark circles so deep they looked like bruises. Her clothes hung off her. She had lost weight, and not the healthy kind. The navy pantsuit was a distant memory. Now she wore cheap jeans and a faded t-shirt with a hole near the collar. She sat across from me, her hands shaking around a paper cup of tea she didn't drink. Thank you for coming. I know you hate me, I know I deserve it, but Lily is innocent. She's dying, Emma. She's dying and you're the only one. Please, I will do anything, anything. I let her talk. I let her cry and promise and beg. She told me about the nights in the hospital, the smell of antiseptic, the beeping of machines, the way Lily would ask if she was going to die. She told me her husband had stopped speaking to her, not because of our history, but because the stress was tearing them apart. She told me she hadn't slept more than 3 hours a night in months. I listened to all of it, my face giving nothing away. Then, when she fell silent, I said my piece. There are 2 things you're going to do, Melissa. First, you're going to write a public confession. You'll post it on your Facebook and your Instagram. You'll tag every relative, every family friend, every person who believed your lies. You will explain exactly what you did. How you manipulated Mom while she was dying. How you coached witnesses. How you cut me out and stole my inheritance. How you then taunted me while I was homeless. You will use your own words and you will not blame anyone else. Second, you will wire me $435,000, the full amount of the estate you took. I know you still have assets. I know you have savings, investments, whatever is left of the house equity. Liquidate what you must. I want every cent in my bank account before I set foot in a hospital. Melissa's face cycled through emotions like a slot machine. Shock, fury, disbelief. She sputtered. That's extortion. You're holding my daughter's life hostage for money. You're just as greedy as Mom thought you were. You're a monster. I didn't flinch. I had rehearsed this in my head 100 times. I'm not negotiating. You took everything from me and left me to rot. You lied to our dying mother and made her final months a web of deceit. You destroyed my life and then danced on the ashes. I am not asking for a reward. I am asking for you to make things right. This is restitution for a wrong you committed, and I will save Lily. I am the only one who can. But first, I need to know that justice has been done. Those are my terms. You have until next Friday. I stood up and walked out. Melissa screamed after me, calling me every name in the book, her voice cracking with rage, but I kept walking, my legs steady. I got in my car and drove back to Austin with the windows down and the radio off, and my heart was pounding, but my mind was clear. The next week was a torrent of texts and calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Melissa must have given my contact to every relative who still spoke to her. An uncle I hadn't seen in a decade left a voicemail saying I was a disgrace. A cousin sent a long message about forgiveness and family loyalty, full of Bible verses and guilt. Another relative, a second cousin I'd met at a wedding once, wrote a paragraph about how I was using a child as a pawn. I deleted them all without responding. I wasn't doing this for their approval. The hospital coordinator checked in twice to see if I'd made a decision. I told her I had personal matters to resolve first, and she didn't press. She was clearly in a difficult position, but she just said, "Take the time you need. The window is open, but it won't stay open forever." I knew that. I could feel the timeline pressing down. Then, 6 days after the meeting, I got a series of alerts on my phone. A mutual cousin from my dad's side texted, "Did you see Melissa's post? Is that all true? I'm so sorry, Emma." I opened Facebook on a browser, not logged into any account, and navigated to Melissa's profile. There it was. A post that was clearly written through tears, long and rambling and broken. She confessed everything. She admitted she had convinced Mom I was after the money, that she had isolated me from the family, that she had arranged the trust in secret, that she had brought in her friend Chrissy to notarize the documents and Chrissy's boyfriend to act as a witness, that Mom had been on heavy medication and was barely lucid when she signed. She admitted she had sent me the Cancun photo to deliberately twist the knife. She called herself a liar, a thief, and a failure. She begged for forgiveness not for my sake, she wrote, but because her daughter's life depended on my mercy, and she was finally, fully, publicly admitting what she had done. The post had over 400 comments by the time I saw it. I scrolled through a few. Shock. Disgust. Some people were still defending her, saying grief makes people crazy, but the majority were clearly horrified. I saw names of people who had shunned me at the funeral now expressing outrage on my behalf. The phone rang. Melissa, her voice was hoarse from crying. "It's done. I posted it. Everyone knows I'm ruined. My marriage is over. My friends won't speak to me. Are you happy now?" I said, "The money, Melissa." She told me she had already started liquidating. She had listed her house, emptied her savings, sold some stocks, and taken out a bridge loan against the equity. I told her I'd wait. 24 hours later, my bank sent a notification for a pending wire transfer. I logged in and stared at the screen. $435,000,000. Exact. I refreshed 3 times to make sure it was real. Then I called the transplant coordinator and said, "I'm ready." The donation process was not easy, but I never hesitated. I went through the confirmation blood test, a small needle in my arm at a local lab, the blood a dark ruby red filling the vial. Then the chest x-ray, the ECH, the meeting with the donor advocate who made sure I wasn't being coerced. The advocate was a kind woman named Margaret, and she asked me a series of questions in a small, windowless room. Was I being paid? No. Was I being threatened? No. Did I understand the risks? Yes, I had read the pamphlet. She looked at me with a mix of curiosity and respect and then signed off. I took the filgrastim injections for 5 days to boost my stem cell production. Those shots made my bones ache so deeply I could barely walk. My hips and my lower back felt like they were filled with molten lead. I was nauseous, exhausted, and had a constant headache that pulsed behind my eyes. But I didn't complain. I just focused on the image of that little girl with the messy braids. The morning of the harvest, I lay on a hospital bed while they inserted 2 needles into my hip bones, one on each side, and slowly drew out the stem cells. It took 6 hours. I napped through most of it, drifting in and out of a hazy, medication-induced sleep. When it was over, I was groggy and sore, but the coordinator told me the cells were already in transport to the pediatric unit. I had done my part. I recovered at Jenna's place, who had driven up to Austin to be with me. She made me soup and watched bad reality TV with me and didn't say a word about the money. She brought me tea and adjusted my pillows and forced me to take short walks around the block until my strength came back. I got updates from the hospital over the following weeks. The transplant engrafted successfully. Lily's white blood cell count started climbing. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. Eventually, the call came that she was in remission. She would need monitoring for years, but she was going to live. I allowed myself to cry then, real cathartic tears that left me emptied and clean. About 2 months after the donation, I drove to Houston to see Lily. Not for Melissa, for Lily. I wanted her to have a memory of her aunt that wasn't just a source of stem cells. I went to the hospital room with a stuffed cat I'd bought at the gift shop, a fluffy orange one that looked a little like toast. Lily was sitting up in bed, her head bald, a drawing pad in her lap. She recognized me. "Aunt Emma," she said, and her voice was weak, but her smile was full. "Mommy said you saved my life." I sat on the edge of her bed and gave her the cat. "His name is Toast too," I said. "He's very brave, just like you." She laughed and hugged it. We colored together for an hour, and she told me about her favorite TV show, a cartoon about talking animals, and her dream of becoming a veterinarian. I didn't cry in that room, but I came close. When I left, Melissa was in the hallway. She looked worse than ever, hollow and broken. She opened her mouth to say something, but I held up my hand. "I didn't come here for you. I came for her. Take care of your daughter. Get her healthy. But don't ever contact me again. I'm done." I walked out into the Houston sunlight, and I have not spoken to her since. In the years after, I built a life that feels solid and real. I used part of the $435,000 to buy a small condo in Austin outright, a 2-bedroom place in a quiet neighborhood with a little yard for my garden. I planted yellow roses in the front bed, the same ones Mom used to love. I invested the rest, keeping it in a diversified portfolio that grows quietly while I sleep. I still work as a UX designer, still love my job, still climb the ladder at my own pace. I have $60,000 in an emergency fund, a retirement account that's on track, and 0 debt. I travel sometimes, nothing extravagant, just national parks and weekend trips to New Mexico, the kind of quiet adventures that feed my soul. I have Toast, who is now a chubby, spoiled senior cat. I have friends, a therapist, a balcony where I drink coffee as the sun rises. I'm happy. Not the manic happiness of social media posts, but the deep, durable kind that comes from surviving something terrible and finding peace anyway. As for Melissa, the public confession was its own reckoning. She lost most of her friends. Some relatives who had believed her lies wrote me long apologies, which I accepted but did not reply to. Others still defend her, spinning some version of events where I'm still the villain, and that's fine. I don't need universal absolution. Her husband, I was told through a grapevine, filed for divorce shortly after the transplant. He couldn't stomach what she had done. The house was sold to pay me, obviously. Melissa now lives in a small apartment in a Houston suburb with Lily, who thank God is still in remission and thriving. I get occasional glimpses of her life through cousins who still talk to her, but I don't seek them out. I don't wish her ill. I just don't want her in my life. She made her choices, I made mine. My hands are clean. Edit. Well, I did not expect this many people to read this. I posted it last night and woke up to thousands of comments. I'll try to answer some common questions. Yes, I received the full $435,000 before the donation. The wire cleared on a Thursday, and I confirmed it with my bank. The hospital had a timeline. I coordinated with the transplant team, and while there was some flexibility, I didn't delay Lily's treatment intentionally. The process moved as fast as it could once I consented. The coordinator knew I had a personal condition that needed to be met. She didn't know the details. She just cared that I was willing to donate and that I was medically cleared. I did not tell her about the money. Edit 2. Many of you are calling me a hero. I am not a hero. I'm a woman who was given a terrible choice and made the only decision I could live with. I saved a child's life because I had the power to do so, and I forced my sister to face public accountability for what she did to me. Those two things are not mutually exclusive, but a lot of you are also calling me a monster. You say I should have donated unconditionally, that a child's life is sacred and using it as leverage is unforgivable. I understand that viewpoint. I genuinely wrestled with it, but here's what I know. My sister stole my entire inheritance from our dying, vulnerable mother and left me to starve. She was never going to face any consequences if I didn't create them. The legal system failed me. The family system failed me. I had exactly one card to play, and I played it. If she had refused, I still would have donated. Lily didn't deserve to die for her mother's crimes, but Melissa didn't know that, and that is what mattered. The leverage was the bluff, and the bluff worked. I will not apologize for forcing a thief to give back what she stole. Edit 3. Several people have asked about the legal side. Yes, I consulted an attorney. The same one who told me I couldn't win a trust dispute. Before I made any demands, I ran the plan by him to make sure I wasn't crossing into criminal extortion. Extortion requires a wrongful threat. I did not threaten to harm Lily. I simply declined to volunteer for a non-emergency medical procedure unless certain conditions were met. My attorney advised me on the exact wording to use. I made it clear that the donation was not for sale. I was requesting restitution for a separate civil harm. The two were linked but not transactional in a criminal sense. I was free to condition my consent on the resolution of a grievance. The line is thin, but it held. My lawyer was very, very careful. Edit 4. To the person who said I stole Melissa's house and ruined her life. No, she stole my life. I just got back what was always supposed to be mine. And her life is only ruined because her own lies collapsed. Public confession was her act, not mine. She could have refused. She could have let her pride win and found another donor, some miracle match from the registry. That would have been a gamble, but it was her choice. She chose to confess. She chose to pay. And her daughter is alive because of it. That is not a ruined life. That is a humbled life, and sometimes humility is the price of survival. Edit 5. A few of you want to know about Lily now. Does she know what happened? I don't know. I assume Melissa has crafted some version of events that paints herself in a better light. That's her burden. Lily is growing up healthy and I hope happy. She sends me hand-drawn birthday cards occasionally through whatever relative is acting as a go-between. I send her gifts at Christmas. I don't want her to grow up thinking her aunt is a villain, but I also can't be in her life while Melissa is there. It's not safe for my mental health. Maybe when Lily is older, if she reaches out, I'll tell her the truth. For now, I'm content knowing she's alive. What would you have done? Because I'd do it again, and my only regret is that I didn't get the money up front sooner. Some lessons are expensive, but mine only cost $435,000, and a little bit of bone marrow.